Hello, everyone. I'm Diane Hodiak, Executive Director of 350 Deschutes, and I'd like to welcome you today to the 5th Annual Go Clean Energy Conference and today's session, which is Transportation, Mobility, Hubs, and Electrification. But first, I'd like to have a few quick announcements. I'd like to thank all of our volunteers, speakers, moderators, and sponsors for making this event possible. That includes Pure Light Power, Ledge Capital, Pacific Power, Deschutes County Solid Waste, Energy Trust of Oregon, G5, Neil Kelly National Car Charging, MindClick, First Interstate Bank, and Republic Services. And a special thank you to Amy Perez, our web designer. Please honor these sponsors with your business, and you may visit them and learn more at the expo page at the gocleanenergy.org website. I'd also like to remind everyone that we have other panels that will follow this one. We have one on electrification that will happen with just a short break. And we also have construction, demo, and waste this afternoon. And tomorrow we have a day on commercial property assessed clean energy. So if you wish to participate in those sessions, you will need a Zoom link, and you can get that at www.gocleanenergy.org. Click on schedule at the top of the page, and that will show you your links. Today, after all of the speakers, we will have questions and answers. But please, in order to help our panelists, it would be great if you could enter who you are into the chat now, just a name and the organization you're with or your position, however you would like to identify yourself in order to help our panelists meet your needs better. And feel free to enter a question or a comment at any time, either preferably into the Q&A, but if it is a comment rather than a question, feel free to enter it into the chat too. So without further ado, I would like to refer now to our moderator, Jason White of the Roaring Fork Transit Authority.
Good afternoon, everyone. Thanks for participating. Happy to help moderate this panel. And just as a quick reminder, Diane already said this, but this is the Transportation, Fleet Electrification, and Mobility Hubs panel. Today, we'll have 4 presenters, and I'll let each presenter say a little more about themselves, but very quickly, we have Craig Beaver he's a transportation director for the Beaverton School District, electric bus fleet lead. Myself, I'm the assistant planner for the Roaring Fork Transportation Authority in Western Colorado. We have Chuck Ray with EV.Energy. He'll say a little bit more. He's transitioning positions. And then we have Jean Crowther with Alta Planning, and she's the new mobility team lead. So having kicked that off, let's go ahead and start with Craig, and I'll let him share his slides.
Great. Thank you very much. It's a pleasure being here. Hang on one second. Let me just get my slide up. And there we go. Okay. Hi, my name is Craig Beaver. I'm the administrator for transportation for the Beaverton School District in Beaverton, Oregon. We're a suburb of Portland, Oregon. And we, over several months ago, we began an electrification project for school buses. We have the first electric school buses in the state of Oregon, and I'll tell you a little bit about that. There we go. Just a quick overview of the size of our district. We're a rather large district. You can see with about 41,000 kids from preschool through grade 12. We are the largest transportation department in the state. We can transport about 24,000 kids a day. You can see the size of our fleet, and we're proud to say about a quarter of that is powered by propane. The balance is powered by diesel, again, with the exception of 2 electric school buses. The goals, the reason why we decided to go with an electrification project were several. Number one, we wanted to introduce EV buses, but we wanted to do so at no additional cost above what it would cost us for a regular school bus. We also wanted to have basically zero net charge for putting in the infrastructure, which could be very costly. We wanted to determine the viability of electric school buses in our daily operations and serve as a case study for other districts. The size of our district, we're the third largest district by size in the entire state. We have the ability and the flexibility to try some things because we have scale that smaller districts may not be able to do that. So we took it upon ourselves to take that on and to be the test site. We're pretty proud of it. And lastly, it was the next step in our clean technology strategy. As I said earlier, we transitioned from diesel buses 25% into propane, and this is the next logical step is electric buses. We partnered with Portland General Electric, and we were able to participate in a grant award with them, which they covered the incremental cost above what a normal school bus costs. In this case, the model cost about $145,000 for a regular diesel school bus. They covered that cost above $145,000. The electric buses were just under $400,000 a piece. So they covered that cost, plus they covered all the cost of the infrastructure and charging stations. We were able to use their expertise and knowledge in putting the infrastructure in and placement and how to use it. They're subcontractors. They're extremely easy to work with. The folks over at PG&E, they came out, did several site visits, helped with the exact placement and all the technical knowledge and engineering that went along with that. They've also been very helpful in our charging structure and how to best get the most money, most use for our money out of our charging structure and our rates. And we continue to collaborate with them and get technical advice as needed. Give you an idea, some of the costs and benefits. So over the period of about a year here, I took the last year, our diesel cost per mile is about $1.38 to operate a diesel bus. For our propane bus, it costs us about 90 cents per mile. And so far for our electric buses, it costs us about 33 cents a mile. So you can see the tremendous amount of savings that electric vehicles are giving us. Because of the pandemic, we were shut down for about a year. We weren't really able to fully introduce the electric buses into the system until April of 21. So we have April and May, we used them a little bit in June, and then now we've used them again at the start up here in September. So our data is a small data set with the electric vehicles, but still it's progressively been getting better. As far as what our costs are, to give you an idea, our average cost per gallon for diesel fuel is $2.35 per gallon, $1.49 per gallon for propane fuel. And so far, it's cost us an average of 18 cents per kilowatt hour for the electric vehicles, and we're averaging just under 1,100 kilowatt hours per unit per month. Right now, we have them plugged in whenever they're not in use. They have about 100-mile usable range on them, and the routes that they're on travel between 65 and 70 miles every day. So it works out pretty well. We are right now we're evaluating from a charging standpoint of just doing a smart charging in the off-peak hours after 8 o'clock at night from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. We're evaluating whether or not that'll give us enough of a charge in order to be able to meet our needs. They're level 2 chargers, so it takes about 8 hours for a full charge in the battery. So that's essentially our presentation, what we're doing, and I look forward to any questions you have with us. And with that, I will turn it back over to you, Jason.
Great. Thank you, Craig. So now I am next up in the slide deck here. So let me share my slides. Okay. So today I'm going to talk about the RAFTA and City of Aspen battery electric bus pilot project. Once again, RAFTA is the Roaring Fork Transportation Authority, and I'll talk a little bit more about the background of our organization here in a second. RAFTA, just to kind of give you some scale, we are a regional transit authority. We're the second largest transit agency in Colorado. By ridership, we're the largest rural transit agency in the nation. Pre-pandemic 2019, we had around 5.5 million rides. It's unique in that we span 4 rural utility regions, and I'll talk a little bit more about how important the utility coordination is in a little bit. And I won't go through every single one, but out of our 100 revenue service vehicles, about 36 are CNG, the 8 all battery electric buses are what I'll be talking about today. And then we have a mix of some gas and diesel, of course, as well. And here's just a quick map on the right here that kind of gives you perspective. If anyone's been out between Denver and Grand Junction, we're in the Roaring Fork Valley. We operate about 70 miles between Aspen and Rifle. So why electric? And at this time, the state of Colorado is definitely making some big gains in greenhouse gas emissions. They've been going through a greenhouse gas roadmap process at the state level. And this pie chart at the top is pretty telling. It essentially shows that transportation is either the first or a close second as the largest carbon emitting sector in the state. From the roadmap process I mentioned, a couple, every department, including CDOT and the Department of Health and Environment, everyone is kind of, going down the same path. And there was a Colorado electric vehicle plan completed in 2020. From that, there was a transit zero emission vehicle roadmap specifically because transit buses are seen as a really good heavy duty adaptation, I guess you could say, of electric vehicles. And then you can see down in the bottom right-hand corner that they have a bold goal of trying to have 1,000 transit vehicles as zero emission by 2030. So we have some work to do, but there's lots of good stuff happening. So why RAFTA, our organization in particular? The mission and values kind of guided this decision. We've been operating them about 20 months now. It was as I mentioned, it's a shared project between the RAFTA, the transit agency, and then the City of Aspen, who is a member jurisdiction. And so we have about half of the local dollars in, and then the other half for the other 4 buses comes from cobbling together different grants. You can see in the bottom left-hand corner there that those are kind of our main strategic objectives, and innovation is really why I think the board chose to kind of be a front runner for BEB technology. And then of course on the right, you can see that we have pristine environment surrounding this entire valley. And then of course, always looking out for the future and our future riders. So the path, very generally, we started way back in January 17 with a scoping workshop. We invited different bus vendors in, we invited the utilities in, we invited planners from the region, really just to sit around the table and talk about it. We ended up getting some money from the FTA Low or No Emissions program, kind of catalyzed everything. And so what we have now is, you can see a picture of one right there. We have 8 of the XC40 New Flyer Excelsior buses. They are all battery electric. We are realizing about 150 to 160 miles per charge. We are charging them overnight, depot charging only at the Aspen maintenance facility. And that we're averaging around 1.6 to 1.8 kilowatt hours per mile, which is a metric that folks in the electric industry will recognize. And in general, that's pretty good because these are operating predominantly around 8,000 feet of elevation above sea level around the Aspen and Snowmass Village areas. I wanted to point to the Holy Cross Energy time of use tariff. And I can follow up with people on that later, but that is a very beneficial move for this pilot project. By basically giving the utility a heads up many years ago, they are giving us a special rate. So if we charge our buses overnight during their off-peak period, it's only 6 cents per kilowatt hour. And then if we miss that window and we have to charge during their on-peak during the day, then it's up to 24 cents, so 4 times as much. So we had learned early on from talking to peers that we really needed to pay attention to the charging rates and whether there were demand rates or what have you with the utility. Is there anything else I want to mention here? No, I think that's good for that one. This is my last slide, just a couple lessons learned. In general, we have 2 or 3 bus drivers and a couple folks in our vehicle maintenance department that have really become champions of this project. And I think that's really important to have that internal support because then it kind of radiates throughout the organization, you know, as far as the culture goes. I mentioned the first one there, reaching out really early to the utility company, letting them know where you want to charge, when you want to charge, how far you want your buses to go, just very general conversation like that. Grant strategy is obviously a big deal, especially for going after transportation and transit funds these days. The total cost of ownership is a big thing, and that includes whether your organization kind of does it yourself internally or you hire a consultant. There's several of them that are experts in this, and you really want to get a full picture, total cost of what it means to go electric and or hydrogen for these zero emission vehicles. The charging and everything is another layer. It's kind of a steep learning curve with the charging, but once you get it figured out, everything works really well. And they're very simple, comfortable, and clean buses. Of course, you always want to maximize public support, even doing maybe a little survey within your region, within your organization. We did have a few issues with our regenerative braking coming on automatically on some icy roads. We do have challenging conditions year round and here in the mountains. We've been able to fix that with our drivers. The depot versus on-route charging is a big deal. We are currently only depot charging, but we are going to be installing one on-route charger in downtown Aspen that will allow us to extend the range of the buses. We'll be doing that in 22. Data and more data, so integrate as much data as possible and have access to it for reporting, and also bring other people in your organization along to understand that data and why it's important. And that goes everything from kilowatt miles per hour down to GHG emissions saved, and getting back to that total cost of ownership of these fleets. Couple more here. User groups or kind of advocacy groups are really awesome to stay involved with. The big one here in Colorado is the Colorado Electric Vehicle Coalition. So they have monthly meetings that I chime into. Of course, information exchange with peers. And then the last one, which I mentioned first because it's so important, is having drivers or vehicle maintenance folks within your organization that are kind of excited to evolve with the technology. So those are my slides, and I'll stop sharing here. Okay, and next up, we're going to have Chuck Ray.
Thanks, Jason, and happy to be here with you all. Let me just do a quick sound check. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you, sir. I asked that question because, and then I also need to ask if you can see my screen, okay?
Yes.
All right, thanks, Jason. Chuck Ray here, formerly with RMI, which up to through last year was known as the Rocky Mountain Institute for the last 40 years or so. I've recently transitioned as of Monday to a company, EV.Energy. My work at the Rocky Mountain Institute or at RMI was heavily focused on bus electrification over the last couple of years. And the reason I'm doing a sound check and a video check is because I am traveling. So I've had to find a quick corner here to discuss with you guys. So what I would like to talk about, or what I want to touch on, are three things: why transportation emissions, the importance of mobility options, and how to accelerate transition to electric. Jason, I got to ask the question here. Are you seeing my whole screen, or are you seeing just a slide?
I am seeing your whole screen, it looks like.
Okay. I don't know. So you're not seeing the whole slide one at a time?
No, I'm seeing you have a timer and it looks like you have some notes to yourself along the bottom of the screen. There you go. That looks better. It looks like you're more kind of in presentation mode. You might just need to hit one more button to go full screen.
Yeah,
But I can see it clearly though. There you go. That looks good.
All right. So why transportation emissions? Transportation is the leading source of carbon emissions in the U.S. or U.S. is the leading source of carbon emissions in the world. And transportation emissions are now the largest emission source alongside utilities and buildings. So transportation is critical to our climate solution. Now in the US, to align with a 1.5C target, we need to decrease emissions by 45%, or let's just use the easier term of by half by the end of the decade. And this is the reason we call it the decisive decade, to get on a path for 1.5C by 2050. We have a lot of work to do over the next 8 years. Now, part of this emissions solution is electric, but it also requires 20% reduction in vehicle miles traveled. So in addition to 70 million EVs on the road in the US, we also need to reduce vehicle miles traveled. That brings us to mobility. VMTs, as we like to say in the industry, or vehicle miles traveled, comes through either not taking a vehicle or taking a mobility option. So a shared ride in the parlance that we use. What this does for us, this is a common image that you see here on the right of your screen, is how much space that 60 people take up in a bus compared to how much they take up in bicycles or cars. So that helps to solve congestion for us, quite frankly, in our cities, absolutely. The vast amount of parking lots that we think of as wasted space often take up 50% of a city's geographic area. And climate emissions, of course, as well as air quality that's really come to the fore during the pandemic. So mobility through shared rides, and then zero emissions through electric drive. So those are buses, shuttles, ride hail, taxi, Lyft, and alternative mobility modes. I thought this was interesting to share just to kind of get an idea of how we moved about, let's say pre-pandemic times. It's still yet to be determined what's going to shake out, as a lot of folks have been able to work from home and even school from home. There are 480,000 school buses in the US. There are 130,000 public transit buses. I don't believe this includes the private shuttles and nor airports and universities. And then twice that many people take their personal vehicle to work, let's say, in cars or trucks. And then just as a tidbit of how we move around, 44,000 daily flights. But the point is, of this is to say that less than 1 million transit vehicles that are used daily, put a whole lot of miles on, is arguably a faster path to climate emissions than trying to flip 70 million electric vehicles, personally owned vehicles, which spend about 90% of their time sitting on the curb. I had put this table together that I thought was interesting for you guys. You can peruse that, but these are as of the end of 2020. So these numbers have changed a bit over the last half year or so, or over the last 3 quarters. I guess we're in October now. These are how many buses we have on the road in the US. And what's really interesting is what are those commitments by the leading transit agencies in achieving a zero emission fleet by some very quickly here. And then most of us are looking at 2040 horizon. We have 70,000 municipal buses at 200 or so public transit agencies. I think that's a good one to understand. We have over 1,000 electric buses on the road and twice that many already on order. In fact, I saw news, I think yesterday, in Austin, Texas, Cap Metro has ordered 197 electric buses to follow up the 12 they have on the road now. So that's a big order, big commitment. That gets them to 50% fleet electrification. Globally, there are over 500,000 electric buses on the road, and that was just a sea change. In just over 4 years, that was a 5x increase. And we're looking for a total fleet in the world of 1.5 million units. And we heavily expect those, or we do expect those to heavily be electric, even starting in the next few years here and with 2030 as a goal. So in addition to what we often hear around bus electrification, and our audience here, Jason and Craig, will absolutely understand this, is, we don't necessarily just have an economic challenge or a technology challenge in using these. It's really the operations. These transit administrators, fleet administrators, have to deliver reliable service. So their challenges are much more around operational reliability. So when we think about that 2040 horizon that I spoke about, we're trying to plan 20 years ahead with technology that's going to be changing rapidly along the way, as well as cost decline. So we need to be able to take advantage of those learning curves and cost curves, as you will. So I just offer this up as one way to think about planning for electrification, not so much based on solely the attributes of electric buses that we have today, but we need an overarching fleet transition strategy because we've got to be able to communicate with our stakeholders internally and externally. Yet each procurement tranche that we have, we need a very specific deployment plan around that number of buses that's coming in for charging, which routes they're going to operate on, et cetera. And then over the long term, we kind of need a scaling perspective of what has to be true to get to the next level of fleet penetration. If we want to take Jason's perspective of 30-30-30 or 33-33-33, there's going to be a major step change at each of those percentages of fleet adoption. So if I can change my slide. So speed, the way that we are electrifying today causes us to really step into a procurement process multiple times. Each time we're going to purchase buses, each time we're trying to figure out charging infrastructure, at the same time developing a plan. I'll talk about that on the next slide of why speed is important. But I do want to point out too, I've spoken about fleets a couple of times here, and it really is those high mile use cases where we can get our emission savings as well as our pull in the time frame of the cost advantages. So what I'll throw out as a challenge for us here today is to think about, each internal combustion engine. That's in our industry, we call it the ICE versus the EV. Every diesel, gas, or liquid propane vehicle that we buy, we're locking in those emissions for the next 15 years. So is it possible to not buy any more fossil fuel and really just focus on the electrification, retire the older vehicles, do the fleet swap that we need to do to put the right vehicle on the right route? When we talk about fleets and high mile use cases with buses, shuttles, and even ride hail, they do operate continuously, putting on 3 times as many miles as we do in our personal vehicles. And with trucking as a significant, contributor to bad air quality, so that falls into the realm of medium and heavy duty, they tend to operate concentrated in urban areas and corridors. So I'm making a claim that if we are electrifying our medium and heavy duty buses, it is intrinsically equitable for those who live and work in these high emission zones. Now, how do we get past a procurement process or multiple procurement processes that require us to make decisions, put out RFPs, evaluate those RFPs, eventually put in our orders and then take delivery? We have to do that every single time. Public-private partnerships can really crowd in private finance. There is a plethora of private money on the sidelines that would love to invest in climate solutions. We just don't have the investable products. So we want to consider P3s, as it's known, or public-private partnerships, which are often used for very big infrastructure projects at the billion-dollar level, toll roads, railways, bridges. We need to think about these at the $10 million to $100 million level, whether that's funding the fleets or funding the charging infrastructure. These are all well calculable. We just need to develop the investable instruments. We can do this with grants, rebates, and green banks can take the risk and really crowd in that private capital so that we don't have to pay the high cost that's required for those returns. And when we think about P3s, you want to think about project finance, because the whole point of project finance is there's a single company that's required to bring in the loans, bring in the private capital, the rebates, et cetera. They design, build, and operate the charging infrastructure. And what that does is it removes the risk from the fleet operator. And that's really what we're looking for here to go faster, is to take some of that operational and cost curve risk off of the fleet operator. Now, when we think about the project finance construct, we're in the realm of turnkey services. And the whole point of as a service is rather than every transit operator or fleet operator, we can think about, let's say, delivery like an Amazon or a FedEx, although they are very large, is we don't have to go through the learning curve one fleet administrator at a time. We can really leverage those third-party turnkey services and financing who are serving 10 to 100 different customers and really accelerating the expertise. So I would offer that as you're looking for procurement or if we're putting out RFIs and RFPs, let's also request from the market as a service offerings, whether that's on the fleet side or the charging side or just the guaranteed energy use. Because if we're not asking and trying to procure in that manner, then we're not going to get those solutions being presented to us. Now, there's a lot to unpack there that we don't have time to do today about the structural issues and accounting issues that arises, but the benefit is removing that risk. So that's it for me. Transportation, it's one of our primary answers to climate emissions. Buses and shared rides, really, really important that you'll hear from this panel today. And we need to rethink a little bit how we're planning and funding this fleet transition. Thanks, Jason.
Awesome. Thanks, Chuck. And now we will go to our last presenter, Jean Crowther. And I apologize if I'm saying your last name incorrectly.
Totally fine. It's Crowther. I think you got it. Well, hi, everyone. I am your last presenter before we have a chance to have some Q&A. And my focus, I'm a principal and a planner with Alta Planning and Design. I'm based here in Portland, Oregon. But I work across North America to integrate new and emerging transportation technologies and services into all of the work that we do at Alta for planning, designing, and engineering for transportation systems. And I'm going to focus my 10 minutes here on mobility hubs, really discussing those as a concept and as a tool, but finding some clear touch points with electrification, how those integrate, and how mobility hubs can support some of those goals. So for just some initial context, mobility hubs are gaining momentum. There's a lot of interest in cities and with public agencies across the country. And fundamentally, it's not a new concept to have a hub, you know, a transit center or an intermodal center that offers access to transportation. But mobility hubs are an evolving approach to really modernizing what that looks like and kind of rethinking how a facility that's connecting people to transportation can be more seamless and can leverage the new digital opportunities we have, really connecting that physical location where someone might catch a bus with the digital infrastructure of, you know, also tapping into shared mobility services or real-time information about travel options. So what you see here are just some images reflecting some of the current work with cities leading pilots to better understand what mobility hubs can offer and where benefits can be captured. The Seattle EVSE roadmap for shared mobility hubs I'll refer to again, but is really an ambitious document that really connects electrification directly with the concept of co-locating transportation services. And this has evolved, this momentum has developed in large part because we've seen across transportation an expansion of travel choices that people have. And that's, you know, certainly been a trend in the last 5 years, but people have more modes to choose from and also more ways to access the modes for how they can travel. And this expansion in choice has implications for how we, as transportation planners or as agencies, may try to tackle mode shift and what opportunities we have for doing that in the current context. And just one specific example of what that might mean, we've worked recently with the City of Portland, the Bureau of Transportation, to evaluate the impact of new and emerging transportation services. And this graph you see here, this graphic, is Portland's work to try to hit the adopted policy that targets trip reduction, you know, moving ahead to 2035. And in their modeling, the Bureau of Transportation has seen that even with the investments planned in their transportation system plan, there's still a gap in being able to actually achieve that trip reduction that's targeted as a policy goal. And the city really sees better integration and better leveraging these shared mobility services and what they offer as an opportunity to potentially bridge that gap and actually meet those future targets. And beyond this effect on how we may try to influence mode shift and what opportunity this presents, we also know that it's already affecting people's travel behavior. And I often refer in transportation that convenience is king and really drives a lot of the decision making for better or worse. And just to put a very specific example of that, UCLA, this is a couple of years old now, but in 2019, UCLA was able to analyze some Uber and Lyft data and found that there were 11,000 ride-hailing trips happening just within the campus boundaries, not into and out of the campus, but just within the campus boundaries, which is less than 1 square mile in total, 11,000 Uber and Lyft trips happening per week. And it really just spoke that even when you look at multiple factors, I mean, these trips are more expensive than other options students may have had at their disposal. Convenience really drives a lot of decision making, which really underscores the value in what you can gain if mobility hubs and other strategies can make more sustainable and low impact modes more convenient. You can begin to capture that. And so the hope here and kind of the sweet spot that these facilities are working towards is finding that intersection between meeting traveler convenience and meeting traveler needs, while also using mobility hubs as a location that can provide incentives for mobility service providers. So really providing convenience for those people who need to make trips and offering incentives for working together and managing services in a way that supports goals for service providers, whether it's transit agencies or the private sector shared mobility service providers. And to really find that sweet spot to capture that opportunity, you know, it's one critical element is to design the mobility services and how people access it so that it fits directly into people's daily lives and into their lifestyles. I've seen research that's pointed to electric vehicle users as some that are more inclined to be, you know, digital app users and smartphone users, and mobility hubs can be an opportunity to really tap into how people already may want to access mobility services and to really steer them towards those modes that are best serving larger climate or equity goals. Beyond fitting these options into people's daily lives and helping to make that choice easier, mobility hubs also need to work within a framework of managing a growing marketplace of service providers. This is part of the expanded choice we have in transportation now. And that ranges from what may be a microtransit service provider to electric powered e-scooter share, bike share, or electric vehicle car share, or any number of other options that would potentially have an incentive and want to be co-located at a mobility hub to really capture those customers and help support trip making. And beyond those mobility services, we're also seeing more thinking and more opportunity to potentially capture the growing marketplace of urban delivery and new ways of moving goods that may also have an opportunity to connect with mobility hub locations. And for all of this to work, there really needs to be an opportunity for mobility hubs to really make multimodal connections make sense, to make it easy, to make it obvious, and to really kind of steer and influence people to what's going to be a good option for their trip and hopefully a zero emission or low impact mode that can support that. And also, we can work to design mobility hubs to achieve multiple objectives. Beyond those utilitarian transportation functions, mobility hubs can work to achieve larger goals. This is an example of a charging docking station that serves micromobility modes, e-scooters and e-bikes, but also is compatible with and can help charge a mobility device that a person may use. And this became one of the objectives that the city of Portland wanted to see accounted for when we worked to develop their mobility hub typology. So thinking kind of more broadly about what charging infrastructure can offer and who it can serve. So beyond those kind of big picture approaches to mobility hubs and what they can offer, I want to walk through just a few more specific thoughts on how to approach planning for and really getting to a successful design of a mobility hub. Through the studies we've worked on with agencies around the country, we've seen over and over again that up front, it is critical to really define what a mobility hub is and what it's going to offer for your agency and to reflect that intention in your definition of it and in how your planning and design progresses. So the Seattle example that I mentioned earlier, very clear, straightforward, that it was a strategy designed to use electrification as a tool to help incentivize providers to participate in these hubs by locating charging infrastructure there that they can access, and also to help spur the shift from for those vehicles, those shared mobility vehicles, to electric charging vehicles, and using hubs as a tool to help really accelerate that switch. For the City of Portland, with their mobility hub typology study, we worked through several iterations of their definition of a mobility hub. And this actually was a conversation prompted by interest from PG&E, the utility here, wanting to see if they could help support a mobility hub pilot, and the city saying, yes, this is great, we want to be doing this. Let's take a step back and figure out how we want to approach mobility hubs and what we want them to achieve, so that the city could be a good partner in working together to look for those opportunities. Having that definition and setting intention at the beginning of the process was really helpful for defining the elements that the City of Portland, in this case, wanted to see, and fed into a typology of different ways that that combination of elements could play out in different environments across the city. And this step of defining and determining what you want to accomplish with your hub is really helpful for what may be an important next step. In many cases, looking back at city code and any applicable land use regulations, that may need to be updated or revised to support what you want to accomplish on a specific site to create your mobility hub. The City of Portland now is in the process of an EV ready code update, which covers a lot of different topics, but that's an example of one area where having your definition and your intention set up front can help you ensure that you are removing any code or policy barriers that would get in the way of being able to offer charging infrastructure or other amenities at those sites. Another tip for the approach in planning and designing mobility hubs is really capitalizing on the opportunity to program for the outcomes you're trying to achieve. Once you have that intention set, you can really ensure that every aspect of design, whether it's where you place the charging infrastructure, its visibility and its convenience, where you place bike parking infrastructure or your preferred carpool parking spaces, it can be a range of different approaches, but in the end, you do want to ensure that the programming for the site and that the design truly does reflect what you want users to choose and how you want that to affect overall outcomes. Another point of guidance is look for opportunities to pilot mobility hubs as co-location of mobility services, to pilot those along with other longer-term strategies and investments that are going to develop over time. So we've already heard some great discussion around the switch to electric-powered buses, and this could be an opportunity to, as an agency is testing out and piloting, that investment, that large investment in electric-powered buses. Is there also an opportunity to pilot other opportunities for accessing mobility to kind of combine that investment in charging infrastructure for buses with other mobility services to support people accessing transit at that location. And then lastly, one other item for how to approach this is to work with partners to make sure you're solving mobility gaps. And this is really just an effort to make sure that mobility hubs are an opportunity to connect with shared mobility providers, to help create more seamless access to transportation. But ultimately, as any city or community does that, it needs to make sure that it's solving for transportation challenges and serving the full range of users in your community, whether that's co-locating at affordable housing locations or looking for opportunities to expand access for persons with disabilities. with that, I will pass it back to Jason, I believe, to shift us over to Q&A.
All right, thank you, Jean. So just to check in here, it looks like we have about a little less than 25 minutes left for this session. It's supposed to be done by 1:15. So I don't see any questions. It looks like we have about 23 participants that are signed in. I don't see any questions in the Q&A box right now. I do see some questions and some comments in the chat box. Thanks to the folks that have put in kind of what their perspective is, who they work for. Let me just glance here one more time. Okay, so I am going to just kind of address a couple here just to draw them out. It looks like a lot of them have been answered, but yes, go ahead. Okay, let's see. So someone was asking about demand management charging, and Craig is charging his buses overnight, I believe, and we are also doing the same thing with our, so he's charging school buses, we're charging transit buses overnight, and that is a demand management strategy to try to realize cheaper utility rates. And so I think that if an agency is able to do that, then that's a big benefit to the financial bottom line of the project. And Craig, I don't know if you want to add anything to that, feel free to jump in, or I did see that you answered something about that in the chat box.
Well, I know that there's a question about other funding opportunities available, and the United States EPA has money available to help replace 2017 and older school buses, and they will contribute up to $60,000 per bus. You have to destroy the used bus, but that's a fairly that's something new. They've been doing it for several years for propane and cleaner burning diesel engines, but EVs were new, I think, as of last year, so it's kind of a neat thing. So
cool. Thanks, Craig. Yeah, and I'll also add on to that too, that just about every state has taken in some VW and Audi settlement money from, I guess what has been called Dieselgate. And so, for example, from my perspective, state of Colorado has taken in somewhere between $68 and $70 million, and then that's getting distributed out through CDOT and some of the other funders for different funding opportunities. So I encourage folks to see what's going on with that in Oregon and other places as well. Let's see here. This one's for Jean. And I apologize if you already answered this in here, Jean, but it might just be good for discussion. What is the first or second most effective starter program for a town or city to help travelers or commuters adopt an alternative mode?
Well, that's the million-dollar question. You know, I think the ideal solution is multiple options offered together that really help cement this idea of right-sizing your mode for your trip, and you have a range of options that you can kind of choose from to do that. So people have this sense of having options other than, you know, their personal vehicle, and that, you know, it's not just choosing the bike or trying to have a person commit to you know, a bike as their main form of transportation. So my first answer would be the more the better. My second answer is we have seen that micromobility, so small lightweight vehicles, have a lot of can have an outsized impact on people's travel choices. bike share, scooter share in particular, have just been very popular. I mean, I'm working right now on a mobility hub study in Salt Lake City, and a historically disinvested portion of the city. And we keep hearing from the community advisory committee we're working with how popular the scooters are. And, we're offering passes for using those as an incentive for people participating in public outreach. So even just that one step of adding micromobility, shared micromobility programs into your community, and also doing the extra kind of promotion and encouraging people to understand how to use that and take advantage of it, can be a big step in broadening people's options and helping people kind of think differently about transportation.
Awesome. Thank you, Jean. I have another question for Craig here. You mentioned that your efforts were part of a case study. Can you elaborate a little more on that?
Thank you. Yes, thanks for the question. What I meant to say is that that we could be used, hopefully, as a case study. We aren't part of an active one now, but since we were the first one in the state to go down this road, we're making kind of a side list of all the things that went right and the things that went wrong. I know that just one thing that leaps out at me already is just the amount of we didn't have very much information, or I didn't have very much information about all the different possibilities of, for example, with charging, the best uses of batteries, and I'm still learning things, of how much of a charge does a battery really need, and only charging to your need level versus charging to a full charge, for example, is one thing that I think we need to explore longer. So right now we have the luxury to think of probably spending more money than we need to right now. But as things move along, I know that there's more economical ways that we can do things, and we can be smarter with our money and use it further. We're learning right now, and with everything going on with pandemics and vaccines and everything, sometimes it's getting pushed to the, I'll be honest with you, it's gotten pushed back. I mean, the buses are up, they're running, they're on routes, kids are getting picked up and dropped off. We're not having any issues with it, but I really haven't been able to really get into the nitty gritty and look at the metrics on it and ways to improve it. And I'm hoping to get there very soon, but I'm dealing with bigger problems right now. So when this is over, hopefully at the end of the year, we'll be able to go back and put something down that others could use if they were in my position and they wanted to start out with it. That's kind of where I'm going with that.
Cool. Thank you, Craig. I wanted to touch a little bit on, there was a question.
Can I ask a follow-up question of Craig?
Go ahead. Yeah.
Craig, I'm just curious. I jotted down those numbers when you're talking about what you're experiencing, the cost of fuel, the maintenance. If it holds true for the long term with electric vehicles, which of course we think it does, you're a quarter of the cost per mile on electric that you are on diesel, I believe that was, and a third the cost per mile on propane. So if you looked at something like 50% of your fleet being electric, I mean, how big of an impact is that? Or 100% electric, how big of an impact is that to the district's budget? I mean, is that a massive benefit of money that can now be focused on classrooms or other building infrastructure? Or is it not all that much?
I think when you look at a total cost of ownership over a 10 or 15-year period, I think the answer is, yeah, it is, because the total cost is going to be substantially smaller. The problem is the massive upfront cost in the short term, and being able to, I mean, we have 300 buses. So even if we went with 50%, 150 buses, it's just, that's a tremendous outlay of capital to do that. And secondly, we're talking about right sizing. They have 100-mile life on them. That's about it. They're less than a transit bus, so they can't be used for a lot of things. They can't be used for trips and activity trips and things like that. So they certainly are useful, but they're not the answer to everything. But I think, again, as a total cost of ownership, they absolutely will impact the district on a long-term basis.
Let me follow up one thing there, Jason, just in case folks don't know. I know that there is at least one company out there, Highlands Electric, who's figured out, a fleet as a service package that can take a lot of that or all of the upfront challenge off the plate. So as we're looking for, federal government wants to fund a massive amount of school buses, which obviously makes sense for our kids, and that air quality and their ability to learn when they're at school and not breathing those emissions on the way there or back. There is at least one third party public-private partnership that I was kind of pointing to that's worth having a look at. I don't know the details, but it's classic public-private partnership, and the school districts there, private money is coming in. It's not completely dependent on grants, but over the long run, it looks like that third party, operator can make a small profit off of that and take the big pain off the school district.
Cool. Thank you, Craig and Chuck. And I see Jeff had his hand raised, and feel free to, I think you can unmute yourself and ask it live, or if you want to type it into the box as well. There was, Chuck, can you clarify again who that organization was? Was that Highland Electric?
Highlands Electric, and at least the one case study that comes to mind for me right now, I believe is in Maryland. So you can find, it's Highlands Electric, absolutely, is the organization.
Okay, cool. Yeah, and Carly was just saying here that Jeff, to go ahead and type your question in the box if you don't mind. Thank you. So just to kind of keep us on track here, we have about 10 more minutes. And one thing that I kind of wanted to draw out more, there was a thread through all of our presentations today about equity. And I think that's important whenever we go to talk about electrification, because what's been mentioned today, whether we're talking about school buses, transit fleets, medium duty, like, UPS trucks, where we're talking about even mobility hubs, with TNC, so shared mobility, like Uber and Lyft companies, and bicycles and different things like that. One thing is that, yes, these are more expensive. And so if, for example, from my perspective, if we go to buy a transit bus and it's going to be double the cost up front to buy a battery electric bus over a diesel, then we have to be able to justify that cost and show that that is going to be a good financial decision, environmental decision, but also an equitable decision for all of our customers. And so if we can indeed absorb those costs, like through grants, which help offset the incremental cost, then it helps ensure that we're not passing any of the increased costs through to our customers, our passengers, like through fares or what have you. So I think there's a balance here with this equity part. And another thing I wanted to just kind of draw out too is very generally with shared use, with being electric school buses or electric transit buses. Chuck brought up a good point earlier about these high mileage or high usage, like urban corridors. And so let's just have a case scenario. So instead of the 30 people that might be riding, 30 kids might be riding a school bus, or 30 adults might be riding a transit bus, instead of each one of those people having to go out and have their own vehicle, which they may not even have access to, and they have to go out and figure out how to electrify that. If we can electrify one centralized school bus or transit bus, then we are bringing more benefit to those 30 people. And we're also reducing vehicle miles traveled and extra trips that might be associated with if each one of those people had to figure out their own mobility. So I just wanted to kind of throw out this equity piece. And I was just going to, with the last few minutes here, just quickly ask the other three panelists if they had anything they wanted to add, kind of putting you on the spot a little bit about equity. And maybe I'll start with Craig, since he was the first presenter.
I'm glad you did, and I should have said it early on. Both buses are on dedicated routes to what we have our Title I elementary schools, which have a high free and reduced incident rate, student incident rate. So they are they are basically on our most our high impact schools they're serving. So we wanted to make sure that we did that in order to pass along the benefits exactly like you're talking about now.
Thank you. Chuck, do you have any thoughts on that?
I don't have anything final. I would like to point to all of the infrastructure funding that we're talking about at the federal level. Also has an overlay, I believe it's called Equity 40, that we must have this funding benefit all Americans, number one. So that's a good sign. How to do that, I think, is a real open question for everybody, but at least the objective is out there. I almost want to ask Gene that question around mobility hubs and alternative transportation. I think if we want to consider equity in the flavor of low and moderate income citizens, we need to think about their wallet share they spend on transportation. And how we can lower that when we move to alternative modes or electrification. Absolutely far more important than folks that aren't on that lower income realm. And then I just go back to medium heavy duty. I mean, it's really the corridors where those emissions are heavy, whether that's ports and the medium heavy duty, buses fall into that. So that can have a big impact on those employees and commuters in those areas. And I only point that out because of the large infrastructure funding programs that we're seeing coming from utilities. They need to offer electric vehicles and charging programs to everybody in all flavors. It's really hard to do, everything for everybody. It's almost impossible in a way. So I just point to, medium heavy duty is inherently equitable, and those should be our first investments.
Yeah, and I'll just add that I do think there is a lot of opportunity and some kind of good experimentation happening now around electric vehicle car share at affordable housing locations and similar target places. And I think there's a lot of promise in that, and providing a transportation need and doing it very strategically while also serving these larger climate goals. I will also say, a lot of what I spoke about in the mobility hub discussion is integrating shared mobility services with the other transportation options that we have now in our systems. That has to happen in a way that is providing that affordability piece that I think Chuck was mentioning, just providing equitable access to these services and not letting it be a focus on seamless transportation for those who can afford it or have that choice. And we are at a point, a lot of the shared mobility industry has evolved where there are good examples of ensuring that there's a subsidy or equity component of those that work. I will also say I've heard a new concept in the last year, micro subsidies, of really trying to target just the wallet idea to the community members who need it, and it's spent however that person needs to spend it, whether that's on a bus pass or access to the car share program or the scooter that they need. So it's more of just a bank for a suite of mobility options. Similar to the mobility as a service concept of having these different modes integrated, but thinking about it specifically from how can we make it easy for it to be equitably accessed.
Jason, I have a follow-on thought with Gene. Thank you for bringing up mobility as a service, because all of you are doing this now in different ways. The one that really sticks out for me, I think we saw, especially at the onset of the pandemic, was the need for essential workers to get to their places of employment. So wherever we can connect employers who really have the need for their folks to get to work and whatever that is, I mean, that's a perfect mobility as a service. And again, the equity in there is that, you know, if those folks have a challenge, you know, getting to work, number one, the public's not getting the service. Maybe that's not number one, maybe that's number two. But number two is, you know, many of these folks can't afford to miss work or be late. Like others of us can have these flexible work environments. So we get a double impact there when we can serve mobility as a service to essential frontline workers, for the employers and the employees. So wherever we can find those opportunities, I think we should look for them.
Awesome. Those are all really good thoughts. We have a couple minutes left here, and I do want to address one other thing that I saw in the chat box, and this goes to Craig and myself, I believe. The idea of, we'll call it battery health, in that you may not need to completely top a battery off all the time, and you may not need to drain it all the time, and that there's this happy medium. And so the one thing that I'll mention, then I'll let Craig jump in from the school bus perspective, but from a transit bus perspective, we are working on, with our chargers, our depot chargers inside of our bus maintenance facility. As I mentioned, we're charging overnight, off peak, and we're getting a better rate. We're working on setting up what's called smart charging software, and the manufacturers and vendors are getting better about this. It's evolving very quickly along with the industry. The idea is that you can kind of tether all the 8 buses together, but then you can also individually look at them on a screen and see like how much battery is left. So like if you think of it as a gas tank, how much battery is left to be charged, or the state of charge, SOC as they call it in the industry. And so, for example, if we have a bus that comes in and it still has 100 miles left, then that's going to be the first priority, is to go ahead and quote unquote top that one off and then get it back out, because then it can go ahead and run the full route, versus bus number 3 that might be completely drained and it's going to take longer for it to sit there and charge fully up. So I wasn't super eloquent about that, but you have to kind of look at each bus individually. And I'll let Craig see if he has anything to add to that.
Yeah, we're beginning to explore just what you're saying. I mean, we only have 2 right now, but we're looking to get 3 more here within the next year, so that we'll be in a better position. But exactly, that's exactly what we're trying to do. We are going to be moving towards a smart charge in the next several months, working with our vendors. So I agree 100%.
Cool. Thanks, Craig. Perfect timing. Here we are at 1:15. So I really appreciate everyone chiming in today. I want to thank the panelists for the good discussion. I really appreciated all the discussion around equity. Diane or Carly, are there any wrap-up things that you'd like to add before we sign off?
No, I want to thank all of you. What an outstanding presentation. I personally learned so much, and I hope that our other participants did as well. But just fascinating hearing all of you and how you're dealing with this new technology. And, you know, we heard earlier in this conference from Fermata Energy talking about how, you know, not only are you managing your batteries, but now that you're going to be able to find a way to use that battery you have left as a resilient resource in case your power goes out. So thank you for all those ideas. Incredible presentation. Thank all of you. So I'd like to move next to talking about our next panel, which is more in depth on EV charging. We'll be talking about funding sources. We'll ODOT, Oregon Department of Transportation, we'll talk about the TINA study. So I recommend that you make sure you have that Zoom link, and you can get there by gocleanenergy.org. If you don't have it, click on schedule at the top of the page, and that'll give you the Zoom links at the register button. So before we close today, I just want to mention we have one final word from 350 Deschutes, and I would like to encourage all of you as well to make sure that you complete the survey, excuse me, that will pop up as soon as you end the webinar, because that will inform our presenters as well as us as to how we can improve what you like and what you don't. Thank you.
Hi, my name is Kay Watanabe. I'm a board member with 350 Deschutes. We're fostering an environment, a healthy environment, a safe environment, so that you and all of Central Oregon can benefit from that now and in the future. Please consider supporting our work by donating to 350deschutes.org. That's /donate. Thanks so much. Hope you're having a great day.